Hey there, product-based business owners. Are you trying to grow your wholesale revenue on Fair, but you feel like you're throwing spaghetti at the wall? I see you, and I created something just for you. The Fair Growth Formula is my private podcast that combines all of my experience growing my own candle company, Heart Design Co., that is now in over several hundred retailers globally, and utilizing Fair as part of my sales strategy. You are going to learn how to attract aligned retailers and create a storefront that sells for you. So if you're ready to stop hustling in circles and start wholesaling with strategy and peace of mind, this is your next step. You can grab access to the free private podcast, Fair Growth Formula. You can binge it all in around an hour, and it's packed with proven steps to help you grow. Grab the link in the show notes today, and let's start growing your wholesale business.
When you recognize that the Lord is in control and the Lord is good, both of those things together, then you sat in this grief, but you don't have to stay there. And you can move forward in hope. And so it could get easy to stay stuck in grief and despair if you don't move forward in, but what is true about my circumstances? And anybody can take a look at that and say, well, what is true though about my circumstances? What is something that I can grab onto that's bigger than me and bigger than just my perspective on things?
Hi, friends. Welcome to She Sells Differently, the show for aspiring women entrepreneurs looking to overcome the fear of selling and grow thriving businesses from a place of authenticity and confidence. I'm Andy Hart, and it wasn't all that long ago that I was a sales executive for a Fortune 500 company. But I knew in my heart that I was called to use my gifts for something more, something different. That's exactly why I created the She Sells Differently podcast. Each episode is going to deliver you business strategies, tools, and mindset shifts to help set you and your brand apart from our culture's expectations. It's time to elevate your sales and build a profitable, sustainable business you're proud of, one built on integrity, grace, and humility. It's time to learn how to sell differently. Welcome to the She Sells Differently podcast. So blessed that you are here and super excited because today my biz bestie, Rachel Tenney, is joining us. And hopefully you caught her first episode that she was on the She Sells Differently podcast. If not, we will link that in the show notes. You want to make sure and go check that out. But I am here to welcome her back to the She Sells Differently podcast. So welcome, Rachel.
Yay! I'm so glad to be here. This is so fun. Highlight of my week right now.
Oh, you're so sweet. I love just catching up with you and chatting. I'm so sad we don't live in the same town anymore, but anytime we get to catch up, it's a highlight of my week as well. So just appreciate you coming back on the podcast.
Yeah.
Today, though, we are going to talk about something that you and I have talked a lot about recently, and you have so much wisdom to share here, and that is fears and emotions as an entrepreneur. And my goodness, so much to share here. So I am just excited for you to share your wisdom with my listeners because we all have these as an entrepreneur.
Yes. Well, it's really fun. It feels very full circle to be doing this interview with you on your podcast because you were the one person who really made me gave me the straw on the camel's back to actually produce this course on emotions because I was experiencing how much my emotions mattered in my business and how to work through those in a biblical way. But it was you that actually gave me the idea to make a course out of that experience. And so it feels very full circle to be here talking with you about this because you were such an important part of that story.
Yes. And here's the thing. I have yet to see someone that produced really solid course or a course at all about how to navigate the fears and emotions of being an entrepreneur in a biblical way or at all as an
Mhm.
entrepreneur, and how to overcome them and actually use them to really catapult you, into success, right? And so that's what I'm excited to talk about today. And then we'll share a little bit more about your course at the end as well. But kind of share a little bit more about your personal journey into what led to this conversation. Describe the fears and emotions that you encountered early on.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that you said that we often, we haven't seen a course like this before, and I think that's because we don't recognize that this is what's happening. I think as business women, we're quick to want to look for a practical solution for what's going on in our business. So, if something's not working, like we don't feel like we're making the traction that we want to make, we will quickly jump to, well, I need more strategy for this. I need a plan for this. I need to, get better coaching or whatever. And we're looking at it only from a practical business standpoint. And we're not looking at the other piece of the equation, which is us and what we are bringing into our business, including our emotions. And so oftentimes we aren't even recognizing that this whole battle is happening inside of ourselves. And we're just bypassing that piece and moving on to the practical side. And a lot of people do talk about mindset, which I do think is a big piece of this. They go hand in hand, but we can quickly jump to mindset as well when we're thinking about what's wrong with our business, why aren't, what the piece that we're bringing to our business. And I think that the underlying piece of it is actually our emotions, because it's I kind of talk about it it's like if you have a hot cake and then you try to put the icing on, the icing just falls off. And I feel like that's how our business mindset can be too. If we just jump to business mindset, oh, I need to, work on my imposter syndrome or whatever, and we're not actually dealing with the deeper heart issues that are going on, the business mindset just falls right off. And we can hear something really good and go, oh yeah, that's so good. But it doesn't really stick, and it doesn't really have the impact that we know it should be making. And that's because we need to go even deeper. So that's kind of why I think some of this isn't talked about as much as I think it should be. And I had to kind of come to this the hard way through my own story, because I spent a full year, Andy, just struggle busing it with my business. I knew that I needed to launch a course. I knew that I needed to do certain things in my business, and I kept procrastinating. And I thought, why can I not make progress in this? Why do I keep every time I get close to actually taking action, I go back to the drawing board? It was every time I got close, something would, not feel right. And I'd want to go strategize again. And what I realized was that actually procrastination is not usually laziness. It's often fear.
Mm, that's a really insightful and interesting. Dig into that a little bit more. What was that fear? Because even fear, there's a more of a deeper rooted fear of what,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, so my specific story is that I launched a free thing and did not do a proper launch for it. This was before I knew how to launch something properly. And it flopped, as you can imagine. But I had really put my heart out there with this free thing. I really thought it was going to serve people. I was really excited about it. And then it just did not take off the way I wanted it to. And I remember I wrote in my journal, which I journal in every day, I wrote launch day, and I put this little rocket by it, and I was like, this is going to be great. And I really prayed to the Lord about it. And I was like, please just bless this. I really need a win. And then it wasn't. And I felt so betrayed by the Lord in that, because I had really put my heart out there and really became vulnerable. And I knew that I shouldn't be angry at God for that. I knew that he always does what is good for us. So there was a part of me that wasn't allowing myself to grieve that and lament that and be real with the Lord and tell him that I was disappointed. And so I just every time I would flip through that journal to write a new entry, I would see that little rocket, and I would just it felt like a dagger went in my heart. Oh, that doesn't feel good. But I'm an emotional stuffer. There's I feel like there's at least two different types of people when it comes to emotions. The people who are all in their emotions all the time, and the people who are my emotions don't matter. I'm going to just stuff that aside and get stuff done. And that's me. I'm a stuffer. Um, and so I just kept stuffing that. Okay, that doesn't matter. keep moving on, like put a positive spin on it, keep it moving. And a year later, I'm flipping through my journal, like I'm constantly seeing that little rocket. And I felt that dagger in my heart. And I thought, maybe I need to deal with this. It's been a year and I'm still not like past this. So I started journaling about it. I started like really praying to the Lord. I started grieving it, and it changed everything for me. I spent just 24 hours processing that, talking with you, talking with my husband, talking with some other friends about it, and processing what actually happened. How can I understand this in a good way and feel the things that I actually need to feel? And when I did that, I moved past that grief in 24 hours. What had kept me stuck for a year only took 24 hours for me to like actually dig in, process, and move forward. And so I thought, wow, that was crazy. Like that I was stuck for a year. What if I could help other people to do the same thing that I just did? And so I started studying emotions. I started studying even like the psychology of these things, how our bodies play a part, like somatics, in holding on to feelings, and how we can process these things. I went to the Psalms and I looked at how scripture tells us to process things. Like lament is actually a really big biblical category that we often don't think about, but we're supposed to grieve things, and that's okay. And that's something that the Lord wants us to do. And so I pulled all these themes from the Psalms of like how to work through your emotions and created a system that will take you from day one, not even knowing you have, an emotional problem, into like recognizing what that is and then processing what it is and grieving it and then moving forward, even if you still feel scared, and like moving through that whole process to action.
So let's talk about that, because the reality is, I know everyone listening to this episode right now has had a failure in their life, or they have been disappointed, whether they believe in God or not. And so everyone listening knows this is, I teach business and selling skills from a faith-based perspective. And so whether you believe in God or not, you have had a failure in your life at some point. And so I would love to walk through what that grieving process really looked like for you, and kind of how you teach that from a step-by-step perspective, and what helped you in that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so what I do in the course, and what was helpful for me, and what I found is, as I'm helping people walk through these steps, everybody does it in a different order, which is so cool. Like we're all different and we all have our own process that we need to go through, but this is the order that I found is most helpful for the most amount of people, which is first to just assess, like first just observe what is going on in me. What feelings am I feeling? And part of this is even recognizing the bodily sensations that we have with somatics. Like, are my shoulders really tight? Do I have a knot in my stomach? Do I have a restricted feeling in my throat? Like, where are you feeling, emotions? And sometimes, like for emotional stuffers like me, we recognize it first in our body before we recognize, oh yeah, I do feel anxious,
Yeah.
like that. So assess. And then once you know what it is that you're dealing with, and it could be so many things, like here are a couple examples. It could be like you feel imposter syndrome. You feel like I'm not as good as that other person. It's comparison, right? It could be perfectionism, like I need to work on this and work on this and work on this, and it's not ready yet. It could just be stuck in that analysis paralysis, perfectionism loop. It could be you're afraid of being perceived a certain way, like especially, being perceived as salesy, right? Which is something we
Mm-hmm.
talk about so well on this podcast. I love it because we don't need to be afraid of selling when we're doing it from a place of service. But if we have a fear around how we're being perceived like that, that can keep us stuck. We can also just have decision-making uncertainty. Like, I don't know which way to go with this. I don't know what I should do here. What should I make next? I don't know what software to use. We can get stuck on all these different kinds of decisions. I don't know who to hire or when to hire. And so with all of these different things, once you've recognized what it is, then you lament. If there is something to lament. And there's not always something to lament. Sometimes you realize, oh, I'm just afraid of people seeing me this way, and I need to move on to the other steps with that one. But sometimes it's a hurt that you've experienced. It could be something like what I went through where you feel like, something didn't go well. And so you could be disappointed. Or it could be something like somebody ripped you off, you know? You had a really bad client experience, or, you had a business partner that you had a falling out with. So sometimes it could be an interpersonal thing, like a conflict that you need to just grieve and you need to sit with for a little bit and recognize that really hurt.
So, on lament, what does that look like practically for people that may not have ever been told to lament or even to really, you know, have practiced that before? What does that look like on a practical level?
Yeah, that is a great question. Lament is such a foreign concept to us as Americans because we don't really
Yeah.
practice that as part of our culture. A lot of other cultures, like Jewish culture, many other cultures, have built in systems for grieving as a community, for grieving just in general. There's more of a place for that in their culture. So I think that this is something that we as Americans can learn from other cultures is how to grieve better. And as a Christian, I read the scriptures and I realize God has given us a lot of language to do that with. And so this is something we're given permission to do. As Christians, sometimes we can feel like, well, if I believe that God is in control of everything and he does everything for my good, then why should I, grieve if something happens? I should just trust God in that. But we call that spiritual bypassing because you don't have to shortcut the process. And we actually see Jesus do this. In the Gospels, it tells the story about how one of his really good friends, Lazarus, dies. And shortly after that, Jesus raises him from the dead. But before that, like 5 minutes before he raises him from the dead, he gets to Mary and Martha, Lazarus' sisters, and he weeps with them. So he didn't spiritually bypass their grief, right? He didn't say, oh, it's fine, I'm going to raise him from the dead. He allowed them to grieve what had happened. And he also grieved in the reality
Yeah.
of death, even though he knew he was going to raise him in like 5 minutes. And I think
Yeah.
it's such a beautiful picture of how God interacts with our grief. He allows us to grieve, even though we know it's all going to be made right in the end, even though we know we can trust God. That doesn't need to negate the grief that we feel.
Yeah. I think that's very well said. And I think even lament doesn't always mean crying or weeping. Sometimes it's just recognizing the
Yes.
hurt
Yeah.
that you feel because recognizing can be the start of a healing process, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah.
And even vulnerable moment on the podcast. Before we even started recording, when we got on the Zoom call and I saw you, I just started crying. I think it was just kind of like I had all of these emotions and I was kind of lamenting in some sense, just a lot of lamenting that I missed my friend and just also just recognizing the stress that I had built up. And it was also a beautiful picture of the importance of community. And I may be jumping ahead, but in the healing process too, because I kind of laughed in that moment because I was like, I didn't realize I was going to cry. But it was like, I saw you, someone that's so dear to me. And it was like, I didn't realize that I needed to lament in that moment, you know? And so it's interesting to me how community can help in that lamenting process. And even for you in the process of you lamenting of how your launch did not go how you wanted it, a lot of that was you and I talking through it, you talking through it with your husband, Joe, and how community worked through that lamenting process for you as well.
Yeah, huge part. It's so important that we have people to process those things with. And yeah, I love that we get to do this together. And like
Yeah.
it's a beautiful journey to get to walk with other people.
Yeah. It's also vulnerable. It means that you have to be vulnerable, you know? And that's a hard thing for us as humans and also as just as entrepreneurs, because we a lot of times can be, have our walls up, and it can be all about competition and, and pride. And there is a beauty in letting other people in.
Yeah, you could have felt like, "Oh, I have pressure on me because we're gonna do this podcast. I need to keep it together," but you didn't.
Yeah.
You allowed me to come into that vulnerable moment in your own heart, and that was such a sweet thing for me and such a blessing to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it is, like, hard to be vulnerable in those moments and let other people in, but it creates connection that we don't get otherwise.
Yes. So true. So the first was assess and observe, and the second step is lament, and the third step.
The third step is behold, which is to behold who God is and how that changes your situation. So this is, I mean, specific to believers, but when you recognize that the Lord is in control and the Lord is good, both of those things together, then you sat in this grief, but you don't have to stay there and you can move forward in hope. And so it could get easy to stay stuck in grief and despair if you don't move forward in, but what is true about my circumstances? And anybody can take a look at that and say, well, what is true though about my circumstances? What is something that I can grab onto that's bigger than me and bigger than just my perspective on things?
Yes, so true. And I think that when, whether you are a believer or not, we are all longing for something. And so just knowing that, as a Christian, just knowing that I don't have to be in control, that
Mhm.
I'm not in control is such a burden off of my shoulders. And so, yes, just beholding the beauty of the Lord, and that, as it says in Romans 8, that he is working all things out for my good and for
Mhm.
his glory is truly a beautiful, beautiful scripture.
Yeah.
Okay, so 4, what is step 4?
Yeah. Step 4 is to reframe. So this includes pulling in what we just thought about in the last step of beholding, like how does what's true about God reframe how I'm understanding what happened to me? I like to call this like our inner story, right? We all have an inner story that we're telling ourselves about what happened if you're grieving a loss. And so or if you're grieving a disappointment or grieving something. And it's easy for that story to not be exactly accurate. And we all know this cuz you could text a friend and then you see the 3 dots pop up and they're texting something
Yes.
that goes away. We all make a story right then about what's happening on their end, right?
Yes.
So that happens to us all the time in business though. And we don't even recognize that we're making up stories, right? You post something on Instagram and it gets crickets and you make up a story, right? Oh, people don't like me for this reason, or I'm not good enough for XYZ reason, or, whatever it is, right? We make up a story. But the question with this reframing is that story actually accurate? Is that the real story that's happening? Is that true to reality, or is that what I'm telling myself? And oftentimes we are way harder on ourselves than we should be. And the truth is actually much kinder to us in recognizing like I saw somebody, a friend of mine yesterday on Instagram did a great live. And this person is like very put together, like everything, but they had like 2 likes on their post. And I just felt bad for them because I thought, I hope they don't create a story in their mind of like people don't like me because I think they're amazing. And I'm really glad that they did this thing.
Mhm.
But they only had 2 likes. And that's where we can like start to play mind games with ourselves. And so, yeah, we just need to reframe. So for me, with my own story, with the launch, I realized I didn't do a good launch. That's part of the story. It's part of why it didn't go the way that it should have or that I wanted it to was because I didn't do my part. And that doesn't mean that I shouldn't grieve it, but at the same time, I have to recognize my part in it and take responsibility for that. And that also gives me hope that if I do a proper launch, then I can do a better job,
Yeah.
have better responses. So,
I love that reframing. So one of my podcast episodes that is one of the most popular podcast episodes that I have is for reasons that your products aren't selling, and it has nothing to do with your product. And it's one of those things that my clients all the time are like, well, I guess my product is not good because it doesn't sell well. And I'm like, stop telling yourself that story. It actually is probably nothing to do with your product. It's because we don't have it priced right, or we're not doing a good job marketing it. And so it goes to your point that we are giving ourselves a narrative that is not true. And so I love that concept of reframing it. Yeah, very wise.
It's so important because we are constantly telling ourselves those stories, and to be able to take a step back and recognize that those stories might not be true and that we even have those stories. I mean, that's the
Mm-hmm.
big, is even recognizing that that's a story.
Right.
Yeah, there's so much power in that.
Yes.
And then the next step is to ground ourselves in our identity in Christ. And again, this is specific to believers, but for anyone, we can look at what is true about me. And so for believers, we look at, what does Jesus say is true? I am beloved. I am his child. I am, made capable. I have the
Mhm.
ability to do hard things. I am clothed in Jesus' righteousness, and I am worthy because he makes me worthy. Like, all of those things are things that we can stand on when things like that imposter syndrome hit us and we only get 2 likes on our post and we think,
Yeah.
with me, right? And when we are able to take a step back and look at, okay, but what does God say about me, and ground ourselves in that identity, it helps us to grow in confidence. And this is where I love grounding this in my faith, because it's so easy to kind of overinflate how great we are. And I love that my faith allows me to recognize the things that aren't great about me and still be confident, because it's not about.
Yes. Yeah. And I love just that truth, like grounding yourself in truth. And how often do we just get deceived? Okay. And then what's the next step?
Yeah, the next 2 steps are really my favorite, because the next one is challenge, which is a difficult one, but it's also so hopeful. After you've done all this work and you've sat in your grief and you've reframed things and looked at the story you're telling yourself and all this stuff, then you get to say, now it's time to move forward. And you're still going to be scared, right? Like the old saying of, bravery is not the absence of fear, it's moving forward in the fear. And that's what you have to do in this step, is to say, okay, I've allowed myself to feel all these things, and now I'm going to take the next step to challenge
Mhm.
myself to do the next thing. And it could be a small thing. Like, for some people, it's simple. It's like, I need to get this poll out there and get some feedback, right? It could be something really simple. For me, it was actually launching a whole course, which is a really big step. And that was really scary for me. But I had the ability to do that after going through these steps, and I did not have the ability to do that before going through these steps. You have to do the hard work to get to the place where you can stand on something and be like, I'm going to be brave, even though this is hard. So that's the 6th step. And then the 7th step is encouragement and community. And really, that one goes all through the other steps. It's interwoven in all of those things, because we need other people to help us reframe those narratives and reframe those stories, because we just have our own perspective and it's so hard to see something else other than the way that we've seen it. And so to have other people speak into our lives, like you've spoken to mine, like my husband Joe did, and other friends, when they were able to say, this is true about what you went through, or
Yes.
encourage me, then it helped me to bolster myself in the truth instead of continue telling myself the same story over and over.
So true. So just to recapping these, because there's such wisdom here. And I know that this is probably an intimidating process, because as we talk through these steps, people are like, I don't want to have to deal with this. But the fact of the matter is, when you deal with it, and this is not weeks long process, you did this, within a day. And it's so worth it. Look at the success that you've had since, because you've been able to move past a failure. And so you assessed and observe, lament the failure. You talked about beholding who the Lord is, and then reframed your inner story. You grounded yourself in the identity of Christ and in the truth that what is true about you. And then you challenged and moved forward. And then you talked about moving forward with encouragement and community, which is so, so important. And I'm so glad that you're a part of my community. And so I love these 7 steps. And I know in your course, you provide some very, very practical applications that we didn't have time to dive into. And of course, that's a part of the course as well. And so we are going to put the link to your course because this is something that everyone struggles with. And so everyone needs this. And so we're going to put the link in the show notes. And so if this is something that you just feel stuck with, or you are struggling to move past in your business, I encourage you to check it out and look at the course if you need help and practical steps in moving forward past fears and emotions and failures. Rachel is just a wealth of biblical wisdom, and I'm just so grateful for her being on the podcast. So any last encouraging words to my listeners?
Well, I think you touched on it just now when you said that it's easy to feel like, why go through all of this, right? And I think the reason is because these inner stories that we have about what's going on in our business, they are affecting our actions, whether we want them to or not, and whether we recognize them or not. And so the more self-aware you can become, the better of a business person that you're going to be. And so that's why I think it's so important. Like, I'm an emotional stuffer. I don't like dealing with my emotions. That's why I made this course, because I need it. and
Yes.
and when we can take the time to just slow down a little bit, process a little bit, you come out on the other side so much better at what you do, so much of a better business leader. And that's what I want for all of your listeners, is to be a better business leader. So,
yes. Words of wisdom from my girl, Rachel Tenney. So definitely check out her course. And I hope that you have gleaned some wisdom from these 7 steps. I know I have, and I have loved her course as well. I have personally walked through it. So thank you so much for joining us. Last reminder before we wrap up, if you have not subscribed to the She Sells Differently podcast, and if you have not left a review, I would be so honored if you would take 5 seconds, subscribe, leave a review, and it would bless us and definitely help us reach more entrepreneurs. So take just a few seconds and do that. And then we will be back next Wednesday with an all new episode of the She Sells Differently podcast. Until then, I'm cheering you on. All right, that's a wrap on today's episode of She Sells Differently. Friends, it would be a huge blessing to me if you would take 2 seconds to rate and subscribe to my podcast. New episodes drop every Wednesday. Until then, I'm cheering you on in your entrepreneurial journey. See you next time.